As promised, this is the second video devotional for Tuesday, January the 4th, 2022. The scripture reading today was Psalm 83 and 2 Kings chapter 1. This devotional will focus on 2 Kings chapter 1. The title of the devotional, The Final Clash, Elijah versus the wicked King Ahaziah. Now, let's pick up the story, 2 Kings chapter 1. We are introducing a new book in our chronological study of the scriptures, and the time is when Israel is a divided nation. The 10 tribes to the north are now known as Israel. The 1 tribe to the south are Judah as well as Benjamin. And so that's the division. The focus, though, of this chapter is going to be upon the 10 tribes to the north known as Israel. Well, Israel has had a succession of wicked kings. With the death of Ahab, the son of Omri, the Moabites saw an occasion to rebel against Israel, and they cast off the yoke of servitude they had borne since the days of David. You find that in 2 Kings chapter 1 and verse 1. Well, we also find in verses 1 and 2 of 2 Kings 1 that Ahaziah, the son of the wicked King Ahab, and his wife Jezebel, who, by the way, Jezebel had sworn to kill Elijah for slaying the prophets of Baal. Well, Ahaziah had become the king in Israel. However, for some reason, and we don't know how, he had fallen through a window of his palace in Samaria, the capital city of Israel. Well, stricken with failing health, Ahaziah wondered if he would recover from the fall, and sent messengers to consult not with the God of Israel, but with Beelzebub, the god of Ekron, Ekron being a Philistine city. Now, we find in verses 3 through 8 of 2 Kings 1, God's intervention through his prophet Elijah. Well, God sent an angel to Elijah and directed that old prophet, now at the end of his days, to intercept Ahaziah's messengers and say unto them, is it not because there is not a God in Israel that you go to inquire of Beelzebub, the god of Ekron? You see, Ahaziah, the king of Israel, had offended God, and Elijah was tasked with rebuking that king for telling he would never come down from his bed, upon which he would surely die. That's in verse 4. Elijah obeyed, and the king's envoy returned to the king with the prophet's message. Because he had returned too soon, the king questioned the messenger, why are you now turned back? Why have you come back? Well, the messenger, in verse 7, conveyed to Ahaziah the fateful message of his impending death. The king inquired, saying, what manner of man was he which came up to meet you and told you these words? Now, though the messenger did not know the man, the physical description was known to Ahaziah immediately, and the king said, it is Elijah the Tishbite. Well, the king summoned Elijah. 3 times he sent a captain with 50 men to Elijah and demanded the prophet come to him. The first summons we find in verse 9 of chapter 1. The captain summons Elijah, thou man of God, the king hath said, come down. Well, Elijah answered, if I be a man of God, then let fire come down from heaven and consume thee and thy 50. And as we read in verse 11, there came down fire from heaven, consumed him and his 50. Well, Ahaziah sent a second captain with 50 men to Elijah. And this would address the prophet, O man of God, thus hath the king said, come down quickly. In other words, come down now. Come down without delay. Well, Elijah responds to the second summons as he had the first, and fire came down from heaven, consumed the captain and his 50 men. Well, Ahaziah summoned the prophet a third time, sending a captain of 50. But this time, this captain came with a different demeanor. He came with a sense of humility, and he begged Elijah, O man of God, I pray thee, I beg you, let my life, the life of these 50 servants, be precious in thy sight. This time, The angel of the Lord assured Elijah, now go down with him, go down with his captain and the 50 men, and be not afraid. And he arose, Elijah, and he went down with him unto the king. Now that brings us to chapter 1 of 2 Kings, verses 17 and 18. Elijah proved the God of Israel was God alone. Elijah obeyed. And with the boldness of a man whose life had been dedicated to serve the Lord, he confronted King Ahaziah's decision to consult with Beelzebub, the god of Ekron, and his rejection and betrayal of the God of heaven. Elijah declared in verse 16, thou shalt not come down off that bed on which thou art gone up, but you shall surely die. And we read in verse 17 of 2 Kings 1, and Ahaziah died according to the word of the Lord. Now our study of 2 Kings chapter 1 concludes with Jehoram, the brother of Ahab, ascending to the throne. You see, Ahab and Ahaziah had no son. And so the lineage of Ahab, that wicked king, was cut off with the death of Ahaziah. Well, in that same year that Jehoram, the brother of Ahab, came up to the throne of Israel, there was also another man named Jehoram who was the king in Judah. He happened to be the son of Jehoshaphat. Now, I have a closing thought with you. And it is this. In a day when the world and religious leaders call for tolerance and compromise, you and I would be wise to remember the passion and conviction of Elijah. In Elijah, we find the character of a man who walks with God, and whom the Lord will, in our next study, 2 Kings 2 and verse 11, will be taken up by a whirlwind into heaven. Let me challenge you with this thought. Preachers of truth will not tolerate error, nor will believers sacrifice spiritual principles for the sake of peace. How did God come to that? How did Elijah come to Ahaziah? How did he come to that man without fear? It was because he was a man of prayer, and he faithfully walked with God. And I close with a question. Is that true of you? Are you a man or a woman who faithfully walks with God according to his law, according to his commandments, that you are a man or a woman of faith? God bless you. Thank you for joining me. Bye-bye.